In the last lesson, we looked at how to provide default values for optional arguments. In this lesson, we'll discuss how to create functions that can take any number of arguments. Let's say that we had a function called add, which adds n1 and n2, and it just returns the sum of those numbers. That's very well and good, but what if I wanted to add more than two numbers? Well, I would have to add n1, n2, n3, n4, but then I would have to add 4 numbers every single time. So what if I wanted to make this function more flexible and to allow any number of arguments to be used as the input? Well, what I can do is to simply change the code to use this asterisk and then the name of my parameter. That name, args, is by convention what most Python developers will use, and it simply stands for arguments, but you don't have to stick with that naming if you don't want to. But what you do need is that asterisk. That's the really important part. What that tells Python is this function add can accept any number of arguments. And once inside the function, you can actually loop through all of the arguments, which is going to be in the form of a tuple, and you can do whatever it is you want with each of those arguments. Instead of now passing in only 2 arguments, because that was fixed when we created the function, we can now pass in any number of values, like 4 values or 7 values, and we can do whatever it is we want with them. Let's try this code out. I'm going to delete the code related to Python Turtle, and I'm going to create a new file called playground.py. And we're going to use this playground.py to test out what we've just learned. I want you to have a think about what you just saw in the slides and see if you can create a function called add where you can pass in as many numbers as you want, and it will always add together all of the numbers that are being passed into the function as the input and then return the total sum. Pause the video and see if you can give that a go. Alright, so what we want to do is to be able to call this method add, for example down here, and pass in any number of values, right? Let's just go with 3 to begin with. And then we want to receive all of those values inside this function and then add them all together. So we're going to use that asterisk trick. So 1 asterisk, and then we can give a name to the arguments that we receive, which normally is just called args. Now that we've got these args, if I actually go ahead and print it out, and we go to run and then run and change this to our playground, you can see it's basically just printing out a tuple. And that tuple represents all the inputs that were passed in when this function was called. And in fact, if I do a type check on this args, you can see it is indeed a tuple. Now, once we've got hold of this args tuple, we can actually loop through it. So we can say for n in args, for each of the numbers in that tuple, let's go ahead and print each of them. You can see it's now separating them all out, 3, 5, and 6. So that makes it easy enough for us to create the sum. So let's create a sum which is equal to 0, and then instead of printing out each of the n, we can just add the n to sum, and finally outside the loop we'll return our sum. So now when we print this final result by calling add 356, you can see it's now added 3, 5, and 6. And we can call this method in different ways. We can add more values to it, 2 and 1, and you can see it's now equal to 17. And you can basically keep going because it can take any number of values. This is all done by this asterisk keyword, and it basically packs all of these numbers that you've put in as the input into a tuple called whatever it is you want it to be called. So you could call it numbers if you want, or you can stick to the default, which is just args. And then once we've got that args inside the function, we loop through it and we can do whatever we want to each of the values. Now, in addition to looping through it, you can also access them by index, because it's a tuple after all. So we can say args at position 0 like this. And if I print that out, you'll see that the value is 3 because the first one is 3. So that's why these unlimited arguments using this asterisk args is also known as unlimited positional arguments, because the position of your arguments which you pass into the function matters a huge deal. Because if I fetch the one at position 1, it will no longer be 3 and it'll now be 5. So this is a way for us to be able to define a function and specify a unlimited or unspecified number of inputs. In other words, the number of arguments for the function can vary because the asterisk operator collects all of the arguments into a tuple. However, what if we wanted to refer to our arguments by name rather than by position? Well, that is exactly what we'll talk about in the next lesson. So I'll see you there.